Hello, this is Mr. Seymour, and we're going to talk in Chapter 10 about interest groups. And I kind of held this back because I wanted to do Congress first so we have a little bit better understanding of the impact of interest groups, particularly on Congress, because this tends to be where we see the most impact. All right, so let's get moving with this lesson. In this lesson, we're going to talk about the role of interest groups, theories of interest group politics, what makes an interest group successful, how these interest groups try to shape policy, the types of interest groups, and an understanding of interest groups. We're also going to talk a little bit about recent legislation in the last few years that have changed the entire scope of interest groups and campaign finance. And it's through campaign finance that interest groups are going to make their largest impact because it's through money. So we're going to talk about political action committees, super PACs, and something called the Citizens United case. So when we look at the role of interest groups, let's first define what we mean by an interest group. Interest groups are organizations of people with shared policy goals that enter the policy process at several points, and their objective is to try to achieve specific legislative or policy goals. They pursue their goals with regard to policy in a large variety of arenas. Now, this differs from political parties because political parties are coalitions of people with one intent, and that is to get their particular person elected. With regard to interest groups, it's to affect policy. So there are, according to the Encyclopedia of Associations, more than 25,000 interest groups, and this was about 4 years ago in 2009. And the number of interest groups is proliferating very rapidly, particularly with new legislation. Interest groups are very different from political parties. Political parties are there to fight election battles. Interest groups do not field candidates, but choose sides. They are policy specialists. Okay, political parties are policy generalists. Their intent is not for a specific policy agenda or issue, but they want to get their candidate elected. There are 3 theories of interest group politics. The first theory is pluralism, the second is elitism, and the third is hyperpluralism. Pluralist theory says that groups compete among each other to try to get their preferred policies adopted. Elite theory says that upper-class elites should hold the most power and run government. And this is the theory that the one with the most money basically gets to set the rules. Hyperpluralist theory says that groups are so strong that government is weakened. And many would argue that we are in a period of hyperpluralism right now, in Congress especially. So in pluralism, groups provide a link between the people and their government. The groups are there to compete. No one group will become too dominant. And it is assumed that groups play by the rules of the game. Of course, the rules can be changed. Groups weak in one resource can use another resource in order to affect their goals and policies. And lobbying is open to all groups. Now, in elitism, the groups are assumed to be unequal in power. And awesome power is held by the largest corporations, those with money. The power of a few is fortified by interlocking directorates. In other words, they get together and form coalitions to try to affect or steer policy. Other groups win minor policy battles. but the corporate elites win the big decisions. Now, this is a chart showing the perceptions of the dominance of big interest groups. This figure tracks responses to the question, would you say that the government is pretty much run by a few big interests looking out for themselves, or is it run for the benefit of all? And if you look, starting in 1964, the number of people that say that government is run for the benefit of the elite has pretty much outpaced almost 2-to-1 those that would say that government is run for the benefit of the people. The only time in which the two really intersect after 1972 is going to be around 2001, and that's simply because we had a different perspective of government right after 9/11, and that perspective was short-lived. Hyperpluralism, as we've discussed before, is talking about groups that have become so powerful that the government tries to appease every conceivable interest, and no one gets appeased. Interest group liberalism is aggravated by these different iron triangles, and trying to please every group results in contradictory and confusing policy. You can't please everybody, and when the groups are so divided that and so strong on either side, no one is going to win, and that's where we get to hyperpluralism. So, what are the factors that allow for the success of an interest group? We need to look at surprising ineffectiveness of large groups versus small, the intensity of groups, and financial resources. Here's what we call the Power 25. Now, in the Power 25, these are the 25 most influential interest groups. Number 1 is the National Rifle Association. Number 2, the American Association of Retired Persons. Now, is it any question as to why gun control laws are so difficult to pass, and anything that that might affect Social Security or the retirement benefits of an individual tend to not be successful? Then we have the Federation of Independent Businesses, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, which might have something to do with why the United States has such pro-Israel policies, the Association of Trial Lawyers of America, the AFL-CIO, which is the largest union in the country, the United States Chamber of Commerce, the National Beer Wholesalers Association, the National Association of Realtors, the National Association of Manufacturers, the National Association of Home Builders, the American Medical Association, the American Hospital Association, the National Education Association, the largest teacher union in the country, the American Farm Bureau Federation, the Motion Picture Association of America, the National Association of Broadcasters, the National Right to Life Committee, the Health Insurance Association of America, the National Restaurant Association, the National Governors Association, the Recording Industry, which is the RIAA, which is one of the reasons that you see so many lately laws regarding, for instance, regulation of illegal downloads. The American Bankers Association, Pharmaceutical Research and Manufacturers of America, and the International Brotherhood of Teamsters. So, why are some groups ineffective? We need to look at 3 things. One definition is what we call a potential group. A potential group are people who might be group members because they share some common interest. So, for instance, if you own a gun, you might be a member of the American Rifle Association. The actual group are those potential group members who actually join the group. So when you join the American Rifle Association, you pay your dues and become a card-holding member. You are a member of the actual group. Now, a collective good is something of value that cannot be withheld from a potential group member. So members of the potential group will benefit from the actions of the actual group. That means that if you are a member of the potential group of gun owners, and you own a gun and don't pay dues to the American Rifle Association, you benefit from the same policies that are enacted on behalf of the American Rifle Association as those who do not pay the dues. So, large groups are not necessarily as effective as small groups because a small group will benefit just as many people as the large group will because of the idea of collective goods. Those people in the potential group who benefit from the actual group's activities are called free riders. Free riders. And free riders are those individuals who benefit from the collective action of the actual group, yet don't contribute to the cost of getting those benefits. So the free rider problem is the problem of people who don't join because they can benefit from the group's activities without joining. Selective benefits, however, are the goods that a group can restrict to those who actually join. So in a union, for instance, Texas is not a union state. We are what we call a right-to-work state. If, for instance, you have a strong association of people who tend to exert influence over an industry, that industry will benefit, those actions will benefit not only those who are a member of that group, but everybody in Texas, because you can't just require that everybody be a member of the union. Now, intensity. A large potential group may be mobilized through an issue that people feel intensely about, and politicians are more likely to listen to a group that shows that it cares deeply about an issue. And this is why groups like the NRA tend to be so effective. They tend to have a lot of intensity. Single group issues are those with narrow interests. They dislike compromise, and their members are generally new to politics. Now, of course, money talks, and financial resources are intensely important to groups. Not all groups have equal amounts of money. Monetary donations will translate into access to politicians. A phone call, a meeting, a support. Wealthier groups have more of these resources, and they have access, but they don't always win when it comes to policy. However, their chances of affecting policy are much stronger than the chances of the smaller or less resource wealthy groups. I like to give it as an example like this. As a young student, you have a very big, deep concern about college debt and the cost and rising cost of college tuition. Now, you as a student, if you get together with are a potential member of a group, if you get together with other students who are opposed to rising tuition and large amounts of college debt, you have a potential to join a group. Yet, you don't necessarily, because your students have a lot of resources. It's the resources that will give you access to the policymakers. So how do groups try to shape policy? There are 4 ways. One is lobbying. Another is electioneering. Another is litigation. And another is what we call going public or using the media. Lobbying is communication to a governmental decision maker with the hopes of influencing his or her decision. You can lobby as simply as emailing your congressman. Lobbyists, though, are professionals at doing this. They, number one, are a source of information. Number two, they help get legislation passed. In reality, they write a good chunk of the legislation that does get passed. Number three, they help to formulate campaign strategies. And number four, they are a source of ideas and innovation. And of course, they can also be a source of money. Largest group that tends to lobby in terms of money, pharmaceutical industry. Second is the insurance industry, electricity, which would be public utilities, computers and the internet, education, real estate, oil and gas, hospitals, health professionals, telephone, automotive, civil servants, air transport, TV, movies, and music, and telecommunications. This is how much money was spent on lobbying by these industries over a 10-year period from 1998 to 2007. Now, electioneering is when a group gets directly involved in the electoral process by helping to fund a campaign. Political parties are there to get people elected, and special interest groups are there to affect policy. So, electioneering means that you're going to use your money to help fund a campaign within the limits of the law. You're going to get your members to work for candidates, get out there, make phone calls, hit the pavement, and you're going to form a political action committee. And political action committees are very important. They are political funding vehicles created by a 1974 law of campaign finance reform. And because of this law, you can set up one of these political action committees, and as long as the PAC is not associated directly with the candidate, you can use that political action committee to influence that candidate's campaign without directly contributing to the candidate. Now, another way is, for instance, when a case is coming up in front of the Supreme Court, you'll see amicus curiae, which means friends of the court briefs. These are written arguments submitted to the court in support of a case. So oftentimes, if the case would directly affect the policies either way that a group is interested in, they will write an amicus curiae brief on either side. Also, a class action lawsuit enables a group of people in a similar situation to combine their common grievance into a single suit. So if you have a group of people who were harmed by a particular drug, those people could join together and file a lawsuit. But you could also have it the other way, the pharmaceutical companies joining together and filing a lawsuit with regard to a piece of, up to a policy, piece of legislation, or an action that negatively affects them. Now, groups will try to go public by cultivating a good public image, building a reservoir of goodwill with the public, using strategies of marketing to influence public opinion of the group and its issues, and advertising to motivate and inform the public about the issues. The NRA is really, really good about this. The pharmaceutical industry is really, really good about this. The American Medical Association is really, really good about this. And you'll see that they will, especially during campaign time, privately fund commercials or messages. And this has led to some changes in the way that we've seen campaigns run. And we'll talk about those in just a little bit. So this is an example. Paid for by the campaign to scare your pants off. Interest groups spent over $100 million to appeal to public opinion during the debate over health care in 1994. In a counter ad produced by the Democratic National Committee, the argument was made that opponents of the Clinton health care plan were using scare tactics. You can see the tagline at the end of this photo, see? Now let's talk about, I think, probably the most important Supreme Court case that's come out in a very long time, and that would be Citizens United versus the Federal Election Committee. This is a campaign or a political cartoon that came out just after the Citizens United case was decided. Eureka! We've given people's constitutional rights to corporations. Long live corporate personhood. And the question is, giving First Amendment individual rights to corporations through the Supreme Court, have we created, as this case shows, a Frankenstein monster out of the Bill of Rights and our individual rights? Can you give a corporation the same level of First Amendment protections? And that's what this case said that we could do. Here's the background of the case. In the United States, we had a recent ruling by the Supreme Court in the case Citizens United versus the Federal Election Commission, which found that corporations have a right to free speech and to spend unlimited amounts of money on campaign ads. The questions addressed by the court in this particular case was, do special interest groups and corporations have a First Amendment right to free speech? And if you tell a corporation or an interest group that they can't spend money on a political ad or on a message that is important to them because of the policy agenda they want, are you limiting First Amendment speech? And the Supreme Court said, yes, you are. Now, there are certain types of special interest groups, which are called super PACs, that cannot be limited as to their level of fundraising under previous campaign laws, which had started in the progressive era, like after 1907. Spending or advertising, as they have the same First Amendment right to free speech as individuals. The ruling was based on a general interpretation by the 5-4 conservative majority in the case that corporations should have essentially all of the legal protections that are afforded to individuals and corporate personhood. Now, Citizens United is a conservative group, and one of the things that they would do is make videos. And one of the videos they made was a feature-length movie called Hillary the Movie. It was a very big bash on Hillary Clinton, and it was released on pay-per-view and video just prior to the primary elections for Hillary Clinton. And the idea was that they wanted to weaken Hillary Clinton because they thought that Obama would be a weaker candidate. The conservatives did. And so they attacked Hillary Clinton. And there was a lawsuit, and the question was, is this group violating election law by running this full-length video movie just prior to Hillary's campaign election? And they said that this group, Citizens United, had the same right to express themselves as anybody else did. So proponents of corporate personhood generally believe that corporations, as representatives of their shareholders, were intended by the founders and framers to enjoy many, if not all, of the same rights as natural persons, such as the right to free speech, self-incrimination, the right to privacy, and the right to lobby the government individually. Opponents would argue that corporate personhood ignores a very important distinction between natural God-created persons with God-given rights and legally constituted corporations that their rights are given by the state. They also generally argue that the effects of these corporations having these First Amendment rights, like free speech and the right to spend unlimited amounts of money, in an election would allow a corporation to dominate elections, would intimidate candidates, and generally corrupt democracy, because the candidates will become beholden to the source of their funds. And if you don't limit those funds, then you can have one individual corporation or group contribute a tremendous amount of money. So let's look now at the different types of interest groups. There are economic interest groups, environmental interest groups, equality interest groups, and consumer and public interest lobbies. Now, economic interest groups are your largest interest groups, without a doubt, because they have money to burn. One type is a labor group, which is unions usually, that press for policies to ensure better working conditions and higher wages. Business interest groups are interests that generally are unified when it comes to promoting greater profits. They don't really care about the policy as much as the profit. So they're going to fight policies that would limit their profits. So for unions, few issues are as important as their job security. And this is a janitor's union that belongs to the Service Employees International Union that is rallying to protest the layoff of 40% of the unionized cleaning staff at Toyota at their headquarters in California. Environmental interest groups promote policies to control pollution, combat global warming, protect wildernesses, and preserve species. They oppose supersonic aircraft, nuclear power plants, drilling in Alaska's Arctic, and strip mining. But business interest groups are going to form what might appear to be an environmental interest group to actually fight these things. And they'll call themselves things like Citizens for a Cleaner Alaska. What they're really talking about is maybe cleaner energy, but not necessarily. They're talking about wanting to be able to protect the pipelines. So here is an example of a environmental interest group. Greenpeace employs unconventional methods to promote its message. Here you have some activists dressed up as polar bears, with a lady that's a sign that says basically save the polar bear. So that would be an environmental interest group. But if you take an environmental interest group and you put them up against a business interest group, which interest group's going to win? Which one's going to have more power? The environmental interest group might have intensity, but the business interest group will have power because of the money. Now, interests of equality. There are two sets of interest groups that represent minorities and women that have made equal rights their main policy goal. Equality groups press for equality at the polls, in housing, on the job, and in education, and in other facets of American life. So an example might be the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. Another example might be MECHA and MALDEF, the Mexican American Legal Defense and Education Fund. And then another would be the National Organization of Women, which is fighting for women's rights. So this is the National Organization of Women. They play a very prominent role in issues that concern women's rights. Consumer and public interest lobbies. Public interest lobbies are groups that seek a collective good, which is the achievement of policy that selectively and materially benefits the membership or activists of the organization. So this might be pro-seatbelt laws, drunk driving laws, etc. The biggest of these right now, I think, would probably be Mothers Against Drunk Driving or MAD. Consumer groups. In 1973, Congress responded to consumer advocacy by creating the Consumer Product Safety Commission. The Consumer Product Safety Commission is authorized to regulate all consumer products and to ban products that are dangerous. This is where you had certain people who really wanted to push for the safety of consumer products, and they were able to lobby for governmental protections. The rise in the popularity following the 2010 Citizens United versus FEC decision, technically called independent expenditure only committees, which are basically super PACs. Provided they are operated correctly, they can raise unlimited sums of money from individuals, corporations, unions, and other groups and spend it as they wish, as long as they are not directly related to the campaign candidate. Super PACs are made possible by two judicial decisions. One would be the U.S. Supreme Court decision in Citizens United versus FEC. Government may not prohibit unions and corporations from making independent expenditures for political purposes. Another is called SpeechNow.org versus the FEC. The Federal Court of Appeals of the D.C. Circuit held that contributions to groups that only make independent expenditures cannot be limited, as long as they are not directly related to the candidate. So let's look at how interest groups work with regard to democracy and the scope of government. Now, there's a purpose for interest groups with regard to democracy, and the idea is that they're intended to give the smaller person a larger voice, and that's very important. James Madison wanted a wide open system in which these groups compete, which is pluralism. Public interest groups prevailed, are designed to prevail from pluralist competition. Now, those with the elite ideals say that the proliferation of business PACs is evidence of interest group corruption, and hyper-pluralists often point to problems within Congress, such as the government shutdown, to show that the influence of these groups has led to policy gridlock. Interest groups, remember, are designed to maintain policy and programs that benefit them, not to basically support a candidate, but to support policy. An interest group will pressure government to do more things, and as the government does more, the groups form to get more, and the scope of government increases. So the role of interest groups consists of groups that participate in the political process because they want to promote their policy goals. They usually focus on their efforts within one specific issue area, which is very different than a political party that might address a compendium of interests in a public agenda. The theory of pluralism, remember, asserts that the policy-making process is very open to the participation of all of the interest groups, with no one group dominating. A pluralist would tend to believe that as a result of public interest groups, the public interest generally prevails. Elitists believe that only the rich and powerful prevail, and a hyper-pluralist believes no one wins because government becomes crippled. Success has a lot to do with intensity and money. Groups that have large numbers of potential members are usually less effective than groups that have a smaller number of potential membership. The reason is that the larger number of potential members you have, the more of the free rider problem you have. It's easier to mobilize members of a smaller group who have more incentive to participate. Large and small groups can benefit from the intensity of their members' beliefs, and money always helps to grease the wheels of power, but it's hardly a surefire guarantee of success. Lobbying is a strategy that is used by groups to effect policy and to get legislators to become sympathetic with their side and to vote with them. Electioneering is when you affect the election by trying to support a candidate or withdrawing your support from a candidate. Groups operate in the judicial as well as the legislative process using litigation, and that's where class action suits, for instance, and amicus curiae, or friend of the court briefs, come into play. Many groups project a good image, employing public relations techniques to present themselves in the most favorable light, and they want to get their message out there. There are different types of interest groups. Your economic interest groups are going to be business and labor. These are the most powerful interest groups without a doubt because they have money and intense desire to affect policy. Environmental interest groups are generally there with regard to single issues like global warming, pollution, and wilderness protection and protection of endangered species, but they may not have the money behind them. You do have Greenpeace and Sierra Club that tend to have more effect. An equality interest group would be something like the NAACP, National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, MALDEF, Mexican American Legal Defense and Education Fund, MECHA, and also the National Organization of Women. Political interest lobbies are going to pursue policy objectives that they believe will benefit everybody, such as consumer protection laws and drunk driving laws, with Mothers Against Drunk Driving, for instance, being very, very effective. With regard to the issue of controlling interest groups, it remains a crucial point of democracy, because James Madison and George Washington were very afraid of this. Some scholars believe that the growth of interest groups has worked to divide political influence, just as Madison had hoped it would, and this is called pluralist theory. As others who are critics of pluralist theory believe that only the elite benefit, and others believe that no one benefits through hyperpluralism because nothing gets done. The focus on political action committee or PAC systems have had an impact on the way in which special interest groups work, and many believe that they have corrupted American democracy, as well as we've got too many groups now having too much power that can block policy change, which is causing gridlock. And with that, we are done with this particular lesson.